How many of you like public speaking? Anybody? There's a few of you. Okay. I do too. And when you pair that with 50 chapters of Genesis in 17 weeks, you end up with some lengthier sermons. How many of you have great patience? Some of you. Good. Thank you for being patient as we have long sermons. Today we are dealing with chapters 3, 4, and 5 of Genesis. We are doing it in a summary form. We are not going to go through verse by verse. Hold your applause. There is a lot of information, but on the downside of doing a summary is we have to move in kind of chunks of time. Today we're going to cover 1,600 years in just this morning, which is impressive. But what this creates then is a need for you to get some notes that are available on the website or out at the Connecting Center and go back through and further study these things that we can't do in depth because of the time that we have this morning. We are going to go through chapters 3, 4, and 5 of Genesis, so if you're able to open your Bibles, do that. I'm not going to read, like I said, the passage because that is a long way to go. And what we're doing this morning is, up to this point, we have learned new names for God. He was identified in chapter 1 as Elohim. In that context, he was the creator. Chapter 2 last week gave us Yahweh, which was largely connected with Elohim, and it showed us that the same God from chapter 1 was also working personally with mankind in chapter 2. This self-existent, all-knowing God was actually very personal in his dealings with mankind. In chapters 3, 4, and 5, we're going to see the same God. We're not going to have a new name introduced, but we are going to study God in relation to his love and his mercy. That's what we're going to be looking at today. So keep in mind the love and mercy. We're going to have kind of two sections to today's sermon. The very beginning section is going to summarize chapters 3 and then 4 and then 5. And we're going to skip some sections of those chapters because I want you to see the historical story of Adam and Eve and their descendants. And then we're going to come back to some of those verses that we skipped. And we're going to look at how God related to the people, to mankind, and we're going to see his love and his mercy. So I tried my best to put the passages or the verses that we're dealing with on the screen, so as you try to follow along, you won't get lost. And I just pray that we can all do this together. The very first thing that I want to talk to you about is chapter 3. Chapter 3 is coming right out of, we saw the chapter 1 overview of creation, chapter 2, the zoomed in view on day 6, and now we're seeing how Adam and Eve are interacting with God's creation. And suddenly there's a serpent that comes and tests or tempts Eve and Adam. And we see right away in verses 1 through 6 that Satan, in the form of that serpent, distorted, and Eve doubted the nature of God. So the serpent comes up to Eve, and he causes this doubt to happen with Eve, because he looks at her and he says, did God actually say, you shall not eat of any tree in the garden? And if you remember our study last week, God didn't say that. And Eve knows that, but we'll deal with that in a minute. But Satan comes up and he throws doubt and distortion on the nature of God. Because what he's doing is, first, he's undermining God's plan for marriage and the structure of authority. Because Satan doesn't go to Adam, Satan goes to Eve, and he undercuts what God had established. Remember, man is to lead, and Satan goes to woman. So we see Satan undermining God's authority. We see Satan subtly causing a seed of doubt. He doesn't immediately go for the kill. He places doubt in Eve, and he asks her the question that she knows the answer to, but the question itself is enough doubt that she goes, do I really understand God? Is he providing for me? Did he really say that? And that little bit of doubt, even though she knows the answer, Satan uses that, and that doubt grows. But we also see, as the nature of God, Satan distorts whether or not God is going to provide, whether or not God is sincere in what he says, whether or not God knew what he was doing all along. Is God faithful? That's what Satan is doing here right away in these first 6 verses. And Eve knows the answer. There wasn't a lot of things to remember in the garden, right? God said, all of this is yours. Here's one thing I need you to remember. Don't eat of that. So it's not like Eve had all this stuff going on in life that caused her confusion. So she knows the answer, and she even repeats the answer somewhat accurately to this serpent, to his question. She says, no, God told us that we could have any tree. He told us all of this. He said, don't eat of this tree. But then she adds to it. That doubt has already started to affect her understanding of God's command, because she doesn't repeat it exactly. She adds, and we can't touch the tree either. Well, God didn't say that. So that doubt is already working. Satan's crafty. It even tells us that he's craftier than any other beast of the field, referring to the serpent. So that doubt is already working. She also, in her repeating back of when she recognizes that this tree is, look at verse 6, good for food, delightful to the eyes, it's good for making someone wise. What does she leave out? Death, right? This tree is it's pretty and it's gonna taste good and it's gonna make me wise, but she leaves out the very essence that God said, don't eat of this because you will surely die. So that doubt that Satan placed in her mind is already playing tricks. It's already getting her to question the provision of God, the goodness of God, the faithfulness of God, his love. And she's already saying, oh man, is this really the right and the best way to live? And so what happens is she decides to eat. You see, her decision to sin came from her doubt of who God is. She chose in that moment a practical, aesthetic, and intellectual gratification rather than a trust in the nature of God, that he is love and he is faithful. Satan caused Eve to question the character of God, which led to sin. All of those things she knew about God, but she started to question, is he really who he says he is? I should eat of this tree because this talking serpent told me to. And he placed doubt there. Doubt is dangerous. Circumstances speak quite loudly, don't they? Have you ever had someone, or have you ever thought, if God would just provide this for me, then I'll believe him. If God would just do this, then I would know that he's real. If God would just demonstrate to me that he is faithful, then I will follow him forever. Has anyone ever thought that, or even just a smidge? Yeah. But we see that that's not true, right? Adam and Eve had the fullness of God right there. He was constantly showing that he is faithful and he is love and he is kind and he is who he says he is. And the seed of doubt came in. And Eve and Adam chose to turn their back on God. They didn't deal with that doubt in him. They dabbled in that doubt, and it brought sin into the world. Now, in case you think I'm really ragging on women here because Eve sinned, I want you to look at verses 6 through 13. Who was right there with Eve all along? Adam. And we know from last week that God established and he wove into his creation the authority structure which was man needed to lead. Instead of Adam guiding her into the truth, we see that he sinned with her. He took the fruit. So he defaulted on his responsibilities. Adam rejected taking responsibility for his failure by passing the blame to Eve. God came to him, and in verse 12, he looks at God and he says this, "The woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me the fruit of the tree." So not only did he not perform his responsibilities by leading, but then when confronted with the issue, what does he say? Not my fault. In fact, he kind of says it's God's fault. It's the woman you gave me. How quickly they turn when that doubt happens, when that self-preservation happens, and all of a sudden we go, I need to do everything I possibly can to protect this. And even though I know God is all-knowing and all-wise and self-sufficient and self-existent, I know all those things to be true, Adam's going, oh my goodness, I need to hide. The things that we do when we're confronted with our own sin, and we see that with Adam. Now sin has entered the world and separated them from God. Shame took hold as they hid from God. They tried to cover themselves and hide. You remember last week, marriage we discussed, and God wove that into his responsibilities, that marriage was a place where no shame needs to exist, and now suddenly they feel shame, not between them and God only, but between husband and wife. There's shame now. And all of a sudden we see the structure and authority that God had placed in his creation start to crumble and become undermined.